Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Have you ever wondered how your family shaped the person you are today? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Yashinsky Chute, says intricate connections between childhood experiences, brain development, and adult identity are the keys to self-discovery. Yashinsky Chute is a clinical social worker, consultant, mental health educator, and former adjunct lecturer at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. She has dedicated 3 decades to helping individuals, families, and teams realize and reach their potential. As a practitioner and educator, she has focused on trauma, social work ethics, relationships, family development, domestic abuse, and divorce. She joins me this week to share her path and book, What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Yashinsky Chute. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Victor.
Ellen, please share with us your early path and how the dynamics of your family shaped you.
Yes, so my early path actually was the foundation for my book. I'll start from the very beginning. And my mother and father were married, and my father went off to fight in World War II, and he came home from the war, and they settled in Detroit, Michigan, which is where I live, where I was born. And after the war, they had me. And when I was 18 months old, they decided to divorce, which was relatively unusual back then, but they did. And my father found somebody pretty quickly and moved to another state with her. And my mother and I were sort of a couple for the first 7 years of my life. She was seriously dating someone all that time, but they didn't get married until I was 7 years old. And in the meantime, there had been a lot of transition with my mom, who worked full time, and I had a woman who took care of me. And then we moved from Michigan to California briefly, and then we moved back to Michigan. So as a very, very small child, my life was pretty turbulent. There were people in the car, and then my father left the car, and then my mother and I were in the car by ourselves. And when that happens, oftentimes the child sort of takes the other front seat in the car. And that's what happened between us for the first 7 years of my life. And then my ultimate stepfather, a man who actually legally adopted me, came into my life when I was 7. And when he came into my life, if we use the car metaphor, I had been in the front seat with my mother for 7 years, and then I was back in the back seat with my new father driving and my mother sitting in the front passenger seat of the car. And it was from this place in my car that the early knowings came to me about what it meant to sit in the back seat of this car by myself. My parents had many attempts to try to have more children, but without luck. And so I did grow up an only child. All cars have rules, and the primary rule in my car growing up was little girls are to be seen and not heard. And that I took those rules very seriously, and my job in my car was to always look pretty. That was important in my car. And to basically be quiet and not have any needs and not have much of a voice. And so I spent my childhood and adolescent being the only child in the back seat of my car, watching my parents interact and contributing little to the conversation. It worked out really well for my parents because I was a good little girl and I didn't want to break the rules. And I think it kept the car driving, actually, that they didn't have to tend to me so much, that I didn't interrupt them, and that I was okay, independent, sitting in the back seat of the car. And there are many, many things about me that came to be during that time. For one is that I've always struggled with having a voice. It's not easy for me to put my opinion in places where it isn't wanted. I also learned to be very independent. I learned to do things for myself. I learned that if I needed something, I was the one that was going to do it for me. I learned not necessarily to trust that other people were going to be there for me if I needed something. My parents certainly were there in, very difficult times. When I was sick, they were there, and times like that. But just in everyday life, I really felt like they were the couple and I was the outsider, and my voice was not only was it not nurtured, but it wasn't necessarily looked for or wanted in situations. And at my stage of life now, after having three children, growing up, having three children of my own, and now having grandchildren, many of them, I think that children's voices are looked for and are nurtured. And I can't see any of my own children or my grandchildren ever sitting in that same role that I played my life of being a good little girl who always looked nice and who always had a pleasant smile on her face and sort of kept her mouth shut. Or when she opened her mouth, she had to be funny or witty or something perfectly acceptable. So those were my early beginnings.
And what directed your choice of career as a clinical social worker and a psychotherapist?
Well, it's really interesting because everything that I've done in my adult life, both being a therapist and I worked at an organization where I was in charge of all the therapists, and I also taught social work for over 20 years at the University of Michigan. And if you think about those positions, they all are about people looking to hear my voice. So I grew up and created a world for myself where my voice was wanted and needed and called for and appreciated.
Wonderful.
Which is the exact opposite of what I felt in my childhood. Now, I think that very often we either do what we did in our childhood as adults, or we do the opposite of what we did in our childhood as adults as an intentional measure. But I help people find something not in that binary, something in the middle. Who am I really if I wasn't being that person in my car, or I wasn't being the person who was requested to talk all the time? How much would I really talk? What would I really say if I wasn't in either of those positions? And I literally have spent my adult life figuring out what it is I would really say. And there's a lot more to that, but everything that we learn in our cars comes with us. Now, if I had siblings, I guarantee you, and we all grew up in that car where we weren't allowed to speak in the back seat and children were to be seen and not heard. And I developed this life that I have as an adult, basically as a speaker, whether it's individually in a room with somebody or in front of a classroom or in many ways that I am a speaker. I I still think that when I was in situations as an adult with my siblings, that I would return to be that little girl in the car who didn't talk. And that comes up for a lot of adults, is that they create a life for themselves separate from their families of origin, but then when they return and they are back in that car, in a metaphorical way, whether it's at Thanksgiving dinner or in many ways that we may be with our original families of origin, we return to our old roles. We don't know why we do it. We can't figure out why we do it. We don't act that way anywhere else in the world for many of us. And so the journey of my book was really about coming to understand how knowing and being aware of what I was taught, what I assumed, what I intuited from my world growing up turned me into who I am now. And it does for every human. And I know that because of my years of working with people in therapy and coming to see how they're still acting out their early learning every day, and they don't want to, and they don't know where it came from, and it's no longer serving them.
I can
So
share with you my path
I would
very
love to
briefly.
hear it.
And it really echoes what you've been sharing. When I was a young man, when I was a child, my mother and father were separated in age by 20 years. My father was 20 years older than my mother. At the time of their marriage, I don't believe that he was really ready for marriage, but that's another story.
Okay.
I never felt loved by him as a child. And then
Uh-huh.
when I was 8 years old, he took ill and was bedridden, and I became part of his caretaking team with my mother. And for the very first time, I felt that he loved me. And it wired in my young mind, if you take care of others, you will be loved, which is a wonderful thing and set a pattern for my life, except in my adulthood, I would run around and take care of everyone else and neglect my own health and my own well-being, to the extent that it led to some heart problems in my 40s and some other stuff. And I came to the realization that I had to give myself the same care that I had so often given others so freely. And if I didn't do that, I was denying myself what I truly needed, which was self-love and self-care. And that changed my life in my 40s.
Yes, I would say I very much identify with your story. My book is all about self-love, self-care, beginning with self-compassion. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Well, of course, I was taught this. I was taught in my life, just like you, that you don't take care of your needs, that the way that the world feels better to you as a child is when the people around you are happy. And so you're going to work really hard to take care of them because that gives you a better life. But as you say, it doesn't work when you're an adult. We adults need somebody to take care of us, and it has to be us. And many people take care of themselves by yelling at themselves for what they're doing. But my book is about understanding, oh, of course, this is what I do. How would I do anything else? I was trained. I say I was marinated in this. This is what taught me how to be. And so just like your story, you developed health problems. In my story, I developed a terrible weight problem. My whole life, I had a weight problem. And as an adult, having children, I had a bad weight problem. And it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I understood that I didn't need to carry this weight around anymore. I could be okay without it. And just like you begin to love yourself and take care of yourself and figure out what it is that you really want and need in this life with compassion for the child inside that learned what they learned.
How does your background as a clinical social worker and educator inform your approach in what drives you?
So, what I know as a clinician is that we all do what we do. We all do life in a very prescribed way that we learned as a child. That's just the nature of human learning. What we learn as children, I mean, we have so much research to support this now in terms of brain wiring and attachment theory and trauma, for sure. Trauma's the big thing in there. And so we learn how to be a human. We learn to have certain ways of thinking and certain ways of acting as a human. And as we grow up and become adults, we put those things to little tests by social learning theory. We do what we've automatically done, and then we get a negative result and we think, oh, that didn't really work out for me. I'm going to try something else. But what I have found with the people that I do therapy with is that for many of us, in many ways, we're just not able to stop doing what we've always done, even if we don't like the results of it. It's why people in abusive marriages marry over and over into other abusive marriages, because the hard wiring in our bodies is already there. And I see my job as a therapist to rewire people's brains through our connection, through our relationship. And my job is to help people to see their strengths, to have compassion for their challenges, to believe in them, to be hopeful for them, to believe in that people can change, to believe that people deserve to have good things, to believe that none of us, there's no such thing as not good enough. There just isn't. It is what it is. How do we make it work? So many people believe that there was some line that they didn't get into when they were created, and so they didn't get enough self-esteem, or they didn't get enough this or that or whatever. I use the phrase not good enough, but I often say not fill in the blank enough, whatever it is for that person. There's no such thing as a human who isn't enough. There just isn't. And I really believe that. I really believe that. And so when you are in relationship with me, I'm going to be helping you to feel enough and to understand your challenges and to have thoughtful conversations about what you might want to do differently, or why it's hard to do things differently. And we just go slowly, and I'm patient. I don't try to fix people's problems. I try to help people have a good sense of themselves and their strengths, and that they get to, that they deserve to have things better in their life. And they do it themselves. I don't need to solve their problems. I only need to help them develop a different way of seeing themselves and seeing their problems, and then deciding what they want to do. And I'm there to support them.
Absolutely. My experience and my awakening in my late 40s and early 50s led to the creation of a poem called The Healing Power of No. May I share that with you?
Please.
A time comes for choosing rather than losing the essence that makes us so. And in the bestowing, there's power in knowing the freedom that comes with no. When said with compassion, not angry in fashion, and letting the self-love flow, there's a sense of renewing and deep soul imbuing the awareness that comes with no. So with gentle voice and the power of choice and the courage to make it so, I'm still here, my friends. There's no means in this end, just the healing that comes with no.
That is beautiful Would you send that to me? I would love to have a
Absolutely.
copy of.
Absolutely. My pleasure to
Okay.
do so. Please explain how our brain development is influenced by our family dynamics.
Right. So our brains are, and I am not a brain specialist. This is brain chemistry from a social worker, but our actual brain wiring is, when we are born, is not fully formed, and it begins to get formed during our early years. Now, I'm going to talk about what I call the human design flaw. And the human design flaw is that when we are little, under the age of 5 or 6 years old, we are in a stage of egocentric thinking. All human organisms are in this stage. And for those years, because we are in the stage of egocentric thinking, we think that everything in the world around us is because of us. So when we run to mommy and we want something, and mommy is having a stomach ache, and mommy doesn't respond to us with a smile or a greeting or something positive, we leave that experience feeling not that, oh, maybe something's wrong with mommy, but that we aren't loved. We feel rejected, personally rejected. When we're older, we can discern that mommy's on the phone with somebody else right now, or mommy's with my sibling right now. But when we're little, for those first 5 or 6 years, we only assume it as something bad about us. And that wiring that happens during that time is what's produced from that wiring, which is what we call our core values, our core hurts, our core beliefs about ourselves and the world. Those beliefs are oftentimes negative towards us. And we carry those beliefs to some extent for the rest of our lives. That is a human design flaw. And so our job as adults is to come to understand that we were hardwired to think that we weren't lovable, that we were hardwired to think that we didn't matter, that we were hardwired to think that we we didn't deserve things, and many other negative beliefs that dramatically affect who we become as adults unless we can intentionally do something to change those beliefs. Now, in my car, I developed the belief that I didn't matter. I developed the belief that I wasn't lovable, that I wasn't good enough. But I always had the belief somehow that I got to. My mother used to tell stories that we would go to a restaurant, and the minute we would sit down, I would be out of my seat and making friends with people at other tables. And my family didn't stop me from doing that. So I learned that I got to. If I wanted to get up, I could get up. I could go talk to those people. I could make friends with them. And literally, my whole life has been about, maybe my parents aren't giving it to me, but I get it from someplace else. But many of the people I work with, the reason why they're stuck in their job isn't because they don't have the skills to improve. It's because somewhere deep inside of them, they don't think they deserve to have it any better. And I have to work with that belief before anything is going to change in their life. And so that is my job, to harvest those negative beliefs, to see how they're impacting someone's life, and to help restructure, reword, change those beliefs, even if it's, I'm not good enough sometimes. That's a huge change. I'm not good enough at video games. I'm really bad at them. But that doesn't mean that I'm not good enough. It just means that's hard for me. So that's the kind of work I do. It's all based on that early brain wiring and early learning and the beliefs that we leave our family systems with.
My guest is Ellen Yashinsky Chute. Her book is called What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become. Ellen, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your work.
Yes. So my book is available on Amazon. It's What Drives You. It's available on Amazon, or any local bookseller will be able to order it for you. It's a small 80-some page little workbook that helps people to understand the metaphor of a car as a family and understand their own role in their car, and oftentimes their siblings' role in the car, which helps to develop compassion for them. I also have a website at ellenychute.com. And on my website, you can see blog posts and some podcasts that I've recorded. So I would encourage you to go there.
And we'll be back with more of Ellen after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Most people out here think that taking care of one another is important. And most people would step up for a neighbor going through a tough time. Most people around here help out friends and family when they need it. But the funny thing is, most of us won't look for help when we need it. Talk to someone if you're struggling with mental health, because most people out here really care. Find more information at loveyourmindtoday.org. That's loveyourmindtoday.org. Brought to you by the Huntsman Mental Health Institute and the Ad Council.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Ellen Yashinsky Chute. Her book is called What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become. So we talked a little bit about your driving in the car, my driving in the car. You have some more examples of how specific family roles and relationships shape the worldview.
Yes. So the example I like to give, because I think a lot of people of my generation can identify with it, is when I was coming up with this car metaphor, I was speaking to my husband, who's also a clinical social worker, by the way, and I asked him where he sat in his car growing up. And my husband is the youngest of 5 brothers, and the first 4 were 2 years apart, and then there was a 7-year gap, and then he was born. So the 4 older brothers were much older than him. And so I asked him where he sat in his car growing up, and he was actually remembering his actual car. And he said, you remember those old station wagons that had a seat in the way back and the seat faced out the back window of the car? I said, yeah. He said, that was my seat. He said, my big brothers were all up in front in the car, and I was alone in the back with nobody paying attention to me, trying to make friends by waving at the people around me in the car. Now, there's so much power in understanding someone's view of their life that way, in my opinion. He understood that he was separated from this clump of four boys. He also understood that he wasn't going to get what he needed from them. And so he began being very friendly and waving and making friends. And I can tell you that if you met my husband today, within 2 minutes of knowing him, you would see that little boy in the back seat waving. He still is just, his energy is toward moving toward people, making friends with them, getting to know them. He knows the waitress at the restaurant we go to all the time. He knows the cashier at the supermarket. He makes friends with anybody who's in his vicinity for any length of time. And he's just been wired that way. It's a wonderful trait, and sometimes it's really annoying to be the wife of someone who does that. But people play different roles. I talk about the car that I created as an adult. So I have 3 children, 2 girls, and then a boy was my youngest. And in their car growing up, which actually was a minivan, their father sat in the front, in the driver's seat. My seat was in the seat next to him in this van, the other front seat. Only my seat was turned around completely, facing the back at all times. Now, that's very powerful as I tell this story. In the seat behind he is my ex-husband at this point, but in the seat behind my father's children sat my oldest daughter. Her role in the car was to be the high achieving one. And this is a very common role, and many families with more than one child have a high achieving one, and she was that. Since she was little, she would set her goals, she would attain her goals, she would do what she wanted, she would get where she wanted to go. Her whole life has been that way. I refer to her often as me, but without the fear. She just knows what she wants, and she goes and gets it, and it works out for her. My second daughter, the middle child, her seat in the car was behind me. And my son, whose role in the car was to be the annoying one, sat in the way back of the minivan. And much of the reason that I was turned around in my seat all the time was attending to either him being annoying or his sisters complaining about him being annoying. Now, I happen to be very lucky that my adult children all live close to me now, and we have dinner together every week on Sunday nights. There's 16 of us.
Wow.
Yes. Sometimes they're not all there. I mean, I have one that's out of college and one that's in college, but all the way down to a 4-year-old. But if you came to my dinner and you watched the interaction at the table, you would see my oldest daughter being the one sort of in charge, and my middle daughter just kind of sitting more quietly, and my son being the funny one. So he's no longer annoying, but he knows how to fill a moment with something funny. He knows how to get the attention that he always did. Our roles really don't change. I've talked to so many hundreds of people about where they sat in their car, and it's such a descriptive thing. somebody sits on the hump, and in their car, it was referred to as the stupid hump in the back seat. And that's where they see themselves. And it's an identity that we form based on where we sit in the car and how we make sense of it.
Let's talk about your book, What Drives You. You created this as a workbook. What was your motivation behind that?
My motivation was to provide people with questions and space to write or space to think that I think will help them identify what their role was in the car growing up, and also what the roles were of everybody else in the car. And that's the first step in developing compassion for yourself. I also talk in my book about 4 different ways that, and they're very generalized, but they're pretty specific in the ways that families function. I grew up in a perfect home. That's one of the things I talked about. And in the perfect home, everybody does what they should based on the family's list of shoulds. And the shoulds are affected by, all kinds of things: class, gender, age, neighborhoods, all those things teach us what we should be doing. And in my family, you just did what you should. And if you did what you should, everything was going to turn out to be just right for you. The problem with doing what you should is that you never learn what you really want, or what you would like, or what you think might be wrong with the shoulds. And that's also a lot of work that I do in therapy with people, is check on, is that really what you want, or is that really what you think you should? So the book teaches us different ways that families function. In some families, there are no rules. These families live from crisis to crisis. They go from day to day. There's no sort of overarching goal setting. The kids in these families really do become independent often, but also without a sense that they matter or that they're lovable. And these families are extremely chaotic. It's very, very common for somebody who grew up in a chaotic family that when they develop their own family, it's either chaotic or it's a should family, or what we call the perfect family, because they're going against how they were raised. But the book gives just valuable insights into what goes on in families, for us to look at ourselves, for us to look at our children, for us to look at our siblings, even adult siblings, just to have a deeper understanding of who we are and what we grew up with, and just to know those things and have compassion for ourselves.
Please share with us some more of the specific exercises or activities that you offer in the book.
Yes. So in the beginning, I offer exercises like, what do you think the role of each person in your car was? What was your role in your family? Did you have a label? If so, what was it? I was the blank one. Describe the roles and labels of the other members of your family. In what ways do you still conform to your family role? In what ways did you or do you intentionally choose not to? If you created your own family as an adult, what are the roles of each member there? So this gets people used to thinking about systems thinking, and how the system needs everybody to play their role in order for the system to keep going. So I always say the car needs everybody to be in their role in order for the car to drive us from today to tomorrow to the next day.
How may readers apply the insights gained from What Drives You in their daily lives?
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't have account of that from the book, but I can tell you I have account of that from my work with people. And there isn't anybody that I have shared this concept with that has not benefited from it in their daily life. No one.
And can you provide some examples of success stories or personal transformations resulting from using this workbook?
Yes, I certainly can. So I have worked with a person who has three adult children. She grew up in what we would refer to as a very enmeshed home, which is closer than close knit. An enmeshed home is where we need each other so badly that we just sort of conform to what other people need, basically. And she grew up in a home like that. And now her children are young adults and they are at a place where they're sort of trying out things in the world for themselves. And my client was having a very hard time with being there to be supportive, but not overdoing it. So she was actually trying to prevent her kids from having any problems, prevent them from failing at something and learning from that. And what ensued in that is that she has three kids that were really, really struggling to be off on their own. They were struggling to know what they wanted to do in their life or where they wanted to go in their life. And one of the kids was having serious problems with drugs and alcohol. And she was extremely, extremely involved in this because she learned in her car that that's what you do. You just stay really tight over involved. And so we did a lot of work about her original car and about the good parts of it and the parts of it that may have given her some things that aren't serving her anymore. And I have watched as little by little by little, she has let these kids learn about life and not feel like she needs to step in and try to protect them from that. And that is just huge. It's really huge for someone to change the way that they view their role as a mother, as not doing it for them, not preventing their hurt, but being alongside them and encouraging them when they do get hurt and letting them know that they can try again, that they can continue. So that's just the story on the top of my head.
And how do family dynamics influence our approach to personal relationships?
Oh boy. That's going to take longer than the time I have right now. I do a lot of marriage counseling and family counseling, and I can tell you that what we learn in our cars is the most apparent in our family relationships. It just is. And there's many reasons why those old things that we learn don't work, but primarily because families in the 50s are very different than families now. And our children need very different things than we might have needed at that time when we were growing up. And so the goal is not to either do what you learned or do the opposite of what you learned. The goal is to really be in touch with your children and find out from them what they need and how you could be helpful rather than thinking you know and just imposing that on you. As a parent, as a grandparent, as a wife, I have had to come face to face with my issues of not feeling good enough, of not feeling like I have a voice, of not feeling like I have power in relationships. I have had to work through those. Really, that's been the work of my lifetime, is to work through those things in order to be the person that I am today for my husband, for my children and grandchildren. A little bit of wisdom that you only get after a certain point doesn't hurt there either.
Absolutely. My guest, Ellen Yashinsky Chute, her book is called What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute?
When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can, making sure they're safe and comfortable. But it's just as important that you take some time for yourself. At AARP, we can help with information and useful tips on how you can maintain a healthy life balance, care for your own physical and mental well-being, and manage the challenges of caring for a loved one. Because the better care you take of yourself, the better care you can provide for your loved one.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Ellen Yashinsky Chute. Her book is called What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People That We Become. Ellen, in your experience, what are some common misconceptions that people have about the influence of family dynamics on their personal identity?
Most people deny that there was any influence, but I think people also don't really understand how in a marriage, for example, how what I learned in my family is playing out every day in my marriage. And by that, what I mean is that I need my husband to be a certain way in order to make me feel comfortable. And the way that I need him to be all comes from my family of origin. I had a screaming, kind of very sarcastic and mother. And so I need to be married to someone who doesn't really get that tone in their voice, because when he does get that tone in his voice, I back away, I shrink up to nothing. Now, all marriages are a combination of both people's family dynamics, whether they're aware of them or not. And so I just believe that it's really helpful for people to understand what they need and why they need it, and be able to be open about those things in their family relationships, for sure.
What advice would you give to individuals who may be struggling with accepting or appreciating their unique selves?
my advice is that everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be, and you definitely get to be struggling with it. When I'm working with clients, I say to them, you don't need to know this yet, but I know you, and I can tell you things about yourself that are part of you. And it's just you. There's no right or wrong it. There's no right or wrong about it. It's just who you are. And the more we know and embrace who we are, the more control we will have over how we act that out.
And you've shared a couple of your memorable anecdotes or experiences from your own journey of understanding family dynamics. Do you have another one you can share with us?
Sure. So I would share something that just happened on Thanksgiving. I think that would be a good depiction. So there's me and my husband. There's my 3 adult children and their children, my grandchildren, and we have a couple of in-laws mixed in there. And we do Thanksgiving different in our house, different than most people in that we have the Thanksgiving meal at lunchtime. And it's very casual, and we all take a plate. And being in Detroit, there's always a Thanksgiving Day Lions football game on, and we grab a plate, we graze all day, and we sit and watch the football game together. And so a really interesting thing that I can tell you that happened is that the last game that we watched happened to be a very close, tight game. And I just for a moment looked around, and all of us were in this position of, it was like we were the team on the other side of the screen. If somebody would have taken a picture of that, I wish somebody would have, but we would never have been able to duplicate it. But it was just all of us in this place watching this same thing, being very involved in the same thing. And then all of a sudden, the littlest one starts just clapping. And everybody was clapping with him. Mm. And it was just a special thing that there were no words spoken. We were all just involved in this as this large family unit. That would just never have happened in my family growing up. Never.
Beautiful.
And so for me to have that moment, because I've worked really hard on myself to create it, to be open and be present as much as I could, and without overbearing, letting everybody be who they are, it was a very special thing for me.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Just recently, Australia placed restrictions on social media for children under the age of 16. From your experience, do you see social media as a detriment to children, and should parents put restrictions on them?
So here's my reply about social media, video games. When we believe that what's wrong is something outside of us, we lose our power. I believe that children can manage everything if they have parents who are interested, who are there with them, who they go to when they see something bad on social media, who have parents who are involved, who they process their days with. That, in my opinion, is the problem. If social media is your child's babysitter at any age, and you don't know what they're looking at, or talk to them about what they're looking at, or dispute some of the things they read, that is the problem. There's always going to be something outside of us that can present major problems.
So communication and taking interest in everything that your child does.
100%. And I would say most people think, oh, yeah, when they're 8 years old, I can do that. But I would say that's the most important when your kids are teenagers.
Absolutely. What do you hope that readers will take away from What Drives You, and how can it positively impact their lives?
I hope that people will have more compassion for themselves and each other, and reduce fighting and reduce hatred and reduce othering, and see people as humans that are just, including yourself, that are just trying their best to make this very, very hard life work for them.
Absolutely. In you, I see me, and in me, I see you.
Absolutely, 100%.
My guest, Ellen Yashinsky Chute, her book is called What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become. Ellen, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
Yes, my book is available on Amazon or through any of your local booksellers. And I do have a website at ellenYashute.com. And there you can order my book there. You can also see blog posts, and I have some podcast episodes that are there too.
Ellen, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this wonderful message.
Thank you so much for having me, Victor. I really, really appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.